The Prisoner is television's first genuine work of art.
The most underrated, underappreciated talent on the face of the globe.
Who'd now be, I think, one of the big actors of his generation if TV hadn't grabbed him.
But I was putting in things about the Cold War. That was revolutionary stuff to say.
I hated every single minute of it.
She was really strangling. I mean, there was a way of doing it, without actually hurting it.
He turned down being the first James Bond. I thought there was too much emphasis on sex and violence.
And then he came to me at a later period and said, Lou, I just cannot find an ending. I've got too confused with the project.
In September of 1967, the first episode of The Prisoner was aired in the UK, called Arrival. It begins with an intro sequence showing our hero, played by late great series creator Patrick McGoohan, driving a vehicle to leave Pimp My Ride stumped. A Lotus 7 he built himself. He drives to an unspecified office where he angrily resigns from some implied espionage position high up in the British government. As his employee card is filed away, he handsomely drives home and starts packing his things to skip town, but a mysterious Abe Lincoln type gasses him to sleep. He wakes up in an idyllic resort referred to only as The Village, an eerily pleasant prison camp isolated from the outside world. He heads out and meets the many snappily dressed villagers, and as he departs each conversation, they spout what we learn is the show's catchphrase.
Be seeing you. 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 Be seeing you.
This is my favorite thing that YouTubers do, and the point would have been made with like 3 examples, but we just have to, I don't know, show off how many time codes we can write down, and that we have an editor whose time we have the power to waste.
Be seeing.
It's like,
Be seeing you. Be seeing you. Be seeing you. Be seeing you.
It's like, what is this adding? Under an uncomfortably disjointed rendition of Pop Goes the Weasel, our guy heads off to meet whoever runs this village. But first, on his arrival, he meets the butler, the only character besides himself to appear in every episode. One of the many impressive things about this show is the continuous cases we'll see of it influencing our favorite art of the decades following, like Twin Peaks' shared notion that having a short guy makes your thing seem weird. You can also see some Lost influence, not just in the premise, but in these Dharma-style generic village-branded foods in Six's cupboard. Of course, that "be seeing you" line is all over John Wick now. And this car horn plays the Twilight Zone theme, which influenced the Twilight Zone's theme song, even though the Twilight Zone came out 10 years earlier. Wow. Very Twilight Zone. He then meets his first number 2, a village leadership position that rotates each episode, each officer tasked with breaking his spirit, and each with their own values and ambitions towards how that gets done. Although they're the highest position of authority within the village and are built up as the intimidating villains of each story, it's crucial to note that they're not on top of their organization. The mystery of the number 1 pulling the strings is core to the show.
Number 1 was depicted as an evil governing force in this village. So who is this number 1? We just see the number 2s, the sidekicks.
Every number 2 we'll meet has the singular goal of getting him to answer one simple question. Why did he resign?
A lot of people are curious about what lies behind your resignation. You had a brilliant career. Your record is impeccable. They want to know why you suddenly left.
Sooner or later you'll tell me. Sooner or later you'll want to.
I will not make any deals with you. I've resigned. I will not be pushed, filed, stamped, indexed, briefed, debriefed, or numbered. My life is my own.
It's here we start to learn about the village's all-powerful, authoritarian eye. Whoever runs this place has seemingly been spying on him his entire life and has a full profile built right down to how many eggs he takes with his bacon. They also have complete control over most of the villagers, like in this scene where they tell everyone to freeze, which of course influenced that one part in John Wick 2. Control is a big theme here. There's an effort in the village to keep its citizens docile and unambitious, like with this poster. Questions are a burden to others, answers a prison for oneself. And what's fucked up is that's the school cheer at Globalist University where your grandson just applied. Then we get this question out of the way. Why doesn't he just run? In the show's first action sequence, he steals a car and attempts an escape, but we see the security room effortlessly track him and dispatch Rover, one of the most iconic and memorable pieces of imagery to come out of the series. As described by McGoohan, the Rovers are the sheepdogs of the allegory. Eerie, intimidating balls that can't be defeated. Reminds me of, whatever.
You got this.
No, I don't want to say that. It's like a Gex joke. Do we have any alts? Let's just do nothing for this one then. Rover is only referred to by name in one episode, and it's number 6 who calls it that. The novel The Prisoner number 2 calls it Guardian, and the AMC remake calls it The Beast. So I think it's interesting that Rover might just be a cute nickname our hero thought of, and us fans of the show simply honor him by referring to it that way. After his capture by Rover, he awakens in the village hospital where he witnesses some unsettling treatments.
He's coming along nicely.
Fortunately, he finds himself reunited with an old colleague and current fellow prisoner, Cobb. Unfortunately, Cobb immediately jumps out the window and dies. Feeling vengeful, he heads back to number 2's office, but discovers that 2 has already been replaced, presumably after our hero nearly escaped. And this 2 starts referring to him as number 6, a title he hates but will stick with him the entire show.
For official purposes, everyone has a number. Yours is number 6.
I am not a number. I am a person.
6 of one, half a dozen of another.
6 attends Cobb's funeral and meets a woman there who claims to have been working with Cobb on an escape plan. 6 eventually decides to trust her, taking a watch-shaped electro pass that should let him fly a helicopter right out of here. But when he gets there, Rover just allows him to take off, eerily implying the dead end this plan is. And sure enough, they summon the chopper back with a simple engagement of their parking brake.
Game of chess, my dear? I don't play. You should learn. We're all pawns, my dear.
Not true. 14% of us are queens. And 84% of us, I could take or leave. Then we see Cobb is still alive, and we put together that he was so successfully brainwashed in the village, he faked his death in an effort to help crack 6 before he heads out with a German Auf Wiedersehen. Because no one can be trusted in the village, as we'll learn time and time again. But they're not all in on it either, which is why we sometimes see Rover just cruising by, going to thwart someone else's concurrent escape attempt. It's laid out in episode 4 that all non-planted villagers are people who once held important, valuable information that couldn't be risked falling into the wrong hands, and they're here to have it either protected or extracted, like 6. But while some villagers are truly unbroken prisoners, some are wardens, helping number 2 and their cohorts break other villagers. A core stated goal of number 6 is to find out who is in which group. This and every episode ends with one of the only recurring slams to end credits that rivals the Venture Brothers. 6's face slamming into prison bars. So who is number 6 really? Because we only know him as 6, it's very much up to interpretation, and a sizable group maintains he's the same super spy character John Drake from McGowan's previous show, Danger Man, with these events following that character's resignation. Danger Man aired in the early 60s and was a massively influential smash hit show described by producer Ralph Smart as
one of Britain's most successful exports.
It was pitched to McGowan, but he ended up taking on a huge amount of creative control over it and receiving much of the credit for its quality. One critic at the time claimed,
"It could be that McGowan will go down in television history as the man who combined intelligence with excitement and put an adventure series onto an adult level."
While another said,
"Danger Man changed everything, becoming the blueprint for practically every future ITC show."
For those who don't know, ITC is some British bullshit, I don't know. Danger Man on its surface was similar to other spy procedurals at the time, like The Man from U.N.C.L.E. or The Saint. But as was typical for McGowan, he took a lot of personal ownership over the project. According to one Danger Man director, Peter Graham Scott,
Patrick would sometimes arrive on Monday morning to confront us with a completely rewritten script, but it was usually much better.
And guess where I got all these quotes from? Yeah, that's right. Books! I read 2 books for this, and I know that might seem impossible to you, but me? I can knock out a couple books in really no longer than half a year if it's my job. Danger Man's John Drake and The Prisoner's number 6 share a similar ingenuity for how to get out of situations, but when asked to compare the two, McGowan simply said the difference was Drake was always able to think or bully his way out of a situation by the end of the episode. 6 very much remains stuck in the village. There's plenty of evidence the two were meant to be connected, at least at the start of the show's development. Prisoner art director Jack Shampin said the first meeting he took with McGowan was pitched specifically as
a continuation of Danger Man.
And Tony Sloman, film librarian on the show, said this.
When I joined it, on the continuity sheets, instead of P for prisoner, which is what it became, it still said Drake.
But McGowan has always maintained that 6 is not John Drake, to the point where he said he would have preferred someone else play the role, but circumstances wouldn't have it that way. Presumably the show needed his star power to get made. So the question remains, was it supposed to be a Danger Man sequel and they just didn't want to deal with the rights issues, or is the shared DNA of these characters due to them both being played by Patrick McGowan, who through his intense personality and singular artistic tastes took over both shows and inserted himself into the roles? One obvious example being that when 2 is rattling off 6's profile, detailing their oversight of him, the birthday mentioned is McGowan's real birth date and time.
4:31 a.m., 19th of March, 1928. I've nothing to say. Is that clear?
The Prisoner is intensely autobiographical, and no matter the logistical issues licensing John Drake, Danger Man is a part of McGowan's past, so it feels like a part of Six's past. Episode 2, The Chimes of Big Ben, opens with the new, quicker intro we'll get just about every episode, summing up his resignation, capture, and introduction to the village, with the voice of number 2 being specific to the actor playing them each episode.
Where am I? In the village. What do you want? Information. Whose side are you on? That would be telling. We want information. You won't get it. By hook or by crook. We will.
Here, the voice is Leo McKerns, the most iconic number 2 of the series, who wants to bewitch Six, Mr. Darcy style.
I want him with a whole heart, body and soul.
And he gives the most concise number 2 mission statement we ever get.
That's why I'll break. It only needs one small thing. If he will answer one simple question, the rest will follow. Why did he resign?
Number 6 then gives us his most concise mission statement.
Going to escape and come back.
Come back.
Well, I mean, escape, come back, wipe this place off the face of the earth, obliterate it, and you with it.
At the start of this episode, he's already settled in a bit. He's reacting like everything is kind of funny and not taking anyone seriously. And why would he if every interaction could be a trap? Part of this episode's purpose is to show the depth of Six's intelligence and capabilities, and while the powers that be will stop at nothing to get in his head, he's a confident character who's up to the challenge. Today, there's a village art competition going on where the villagers are submitting their loving portraits of number 2, but he uses it as cover to handcraft what is just so obviously a raft, a piece he titles Escape. He wins the grand prize, 4,000 work units, which would be enough to buy a PS5, but he instead uses the winnings to buy a big, beautiful tapestry of number 2, claiming to want it for his house, but really intending to use it as an ironic sail for the raft. He takes off in the morning with a Russian accomplice who brings him to her Polish associate, who gives him a watch to count time on his journey back to London. We see so much of this journey, from them getting put in the boxes and driven around to getting put on a giant ship and even a plane. The shipping people even make sure to convincingly throw the boxes around like they don't know they're full of humans. He finally arrives back at his home office in London and is reunited with a former superior from the job he resigned from, only to be treated with distrust on suspicion of defecting to Russia, especially now that he's returned from his absence with a new Russian friend. He negotiates for asylum for his accomplice, which transitions beautifully into the big question.
Political asylum guaranteed for the girl.
Well, that depends.
It depends nothing. It's guaranteed.
All right, so long as you keep your part of the bargain.
All right.
Right, question 1. Why did you resign?
I resigned. Because for a very long time, Mr. Minnick.
But then, as London's Big Ben chime resolves, he looks at his new Polish watch, which perfectly matches the amount of chimes he heard. 8 chimes for 8 o'clock. But it shouldn't, because there's a 1-hour time difference between Poland and London. So either his Polish associate made a, Polish guy mistake, or something is very wrong here. He stops the charade immediately, digging up a tape recorder playing London traffic sound effects, and chillingly cuts off the ambient sounds of the city we've taken for granted this entire scene. And without a word, he walks out, not surprised, only angry that he's still in the village. The most important thing we learned here, I think, is that at least some of his former countrymen out there in the world are not only aware of the village, but prepared to assist its goals. So now we've got to ask, who is really running the village? There's a consistent thread of the village being this international melting pot, with villagers being brought in from all over the world.
What would Poles or Czechs be doing here?
It's very cosmopolitan. You never know who you meet next.
And earlier in the episode, number 2 lays out the irrationality of pinning this all on any one side.
It doesn't matter which side runs the village. Both sides are becoming identical. What in fact has been created? An international community. A perfect blueprint for world order. When the sides facing each other suddenly realize that they're looking into a mirror, they will see that this is the pattern for the future.
The whole earth as the village.
That is my hope.
So the village is confirmed to be a sprawling multinational organization, and getting that answer out of the way this early gives us a more challenging lens to watch the rest of the show through.
But I was putting in things about the Cold War and about the two sides being the same. and so on. That was revolutionary stuff to say, and you wouldn't get that in many scripts in a pop series like that.
It is so core to the themes of isolation, freedom, and lost personhood the show has to not have any out of, and it's the Chinese's fault.
Yeah, all right.
Any read like that would cheapen what we're doing here. What we're meant to see is an extreme representation of the conformity inherent to just about any society modern humans have built. Episode 3, A, B, and C, gives us more depth to another aspect of the village, their hyper-advanced technology. Not only does number 2's chair emerge through the floor influencing Wallace and Gromit, but the main plot finds him observing 6's dreams and implanting settings and people for him to interact with, influencing Inception's plot device of making no damn sense! What was going on? So was the two guys the same guy? Or God damn, if only Mad Pat was still alive. The working theory the village has for why 6 resigned is that he was going to sell the state secrets he had. So they put him in a gala taking place right after his resignation and introduce characters from his life for him to hopefully confess to. When he thinks back on his resignation, the tech that lets us see inside his mind displays the exact shots we've seen repeatedly in the intro to the show. And I can't tell you whether this means something or if it was just less effort than reshooting, but another example of this non-literal camera work is in later episodes where we see what's supposed to be security camera footage placed absurdly close to the subject and moving with dramatic camera moves. Is there something for us to grasp here about the similarities between TV and CCTV, both as tools for warping narrative and controlling the masses? Leave a comment down below. The twos are always under strict instruction not to hurt 6, instead being forced to defeat him intellectually. This is to preserve the secrets in his head, but also because they believe that he'll volunteer his skills if he ever comes around on the village. So even this level of intrusion in 6's mind is a little over the line, and 2 only takes the risk out of desperation. Unfortunately for him, what he doesn't know is this episode only exists to show a weak number 2 getting his ass absolutely handed to him by number 6. 6 isn't fooled by any of the characters they insert in his dream, labeled A, B, and C, stumping them with personal questions that aren't in their village file for 2 to reference.
How long has your husband been dead? 4 years.
4 years. 4 years?
How old is your son now? Son. Husband, yes. But there's no son.
Help me, please. Help me, please.
What is your son's name? That's an easier question. Thought you couldn't answer.
But eventually he heads off for a meeting with a mysterious D, appearing to finally be on his way to sell out. But when he gets there, he reveals that he was in control the whole time, and D was 6's OC, D, a construction he dreamed up to emasculate 2. Then, still dreaming but aware of the con, he heads to the village.
Your drug failed.
No. He succeeded.
He approaches 2's office in his dream, and there is an awesome moment here where they're so intimidated by 6 that they think for just a second, beyond all logic, that he's actually about to walk in the room. But he's just there in the dream to hand 2 some vacation pamphlets, sticking with that as the real reason he resigned. So maybe he was really going on vacation, which we could surmise from the tropical photos he's putting in his briefcase before he gets gassed in the intro sequence. And I know big tropical photos don't seem necessary to pack for a tropical vacation, but remember back in those days, you could just drive up to the plane, show the pilot a picture of where you wanted to go, and he'd drop you off. It also explains why he was yelling so much when he resigned. I'm missing surf season! The episode ends on our villain getting a career-ending phone call from the higher-ups. This 2's time is spent. Compared to the formulaic television of the time, The Prisoner was a bold new vision, a show on TV that wasn't boring and racist, and featuring bizarre, esoteric visuals and storylines that were effectively brand new in 1967. Surrealism as a movement had been around for decades, of course, but it sure wasn't a thing on mainstream, big-budget, primetime television. As Mike Van Helder described it for Birth Movie's Death,
the show is often aggressively incoherent because McGowan, as both star and showrunner, conceived of it as an act of rebellion, a direct response to spy stories that came out of a conformist, dehumanizing, violent, sexist culture. It's not an accident that 6 is just one ordinal away from 007. It would be unusual and challenging even today. 50 years ago, when most of television was a treacly pablum,
okay, college,
it was a blinding revelation.
So how did this come to be? And what was he smoking when he came up with this stuff? Well, as it seemingly always is, it was just one person with a specific vision given a blank check to make whatever they wanted.
The whole series seems to happen so much from Pat's point of view that it's almost in his head.
I sat down and I wrote a 40-page history of the village, the sort of telephones they used, the sewage system, what they ate, the transport, the boundaries, the description of a village, every aspect of it.
Lou Grade is the star of the best portrait photo on Wikipedia, and also was the managing director at ITC Entertainment when McGoohan was trying to get a post-Danger Man project off the ground. By all accounts, he gave McGoohan complete, singular control over the prisoner off of a one-meeting pitch that he did not understand.
He sort of said, well, what's it about? Tell me. So I talked for 10 minutes, and he stopped me and said, I don't understand one word you're talking about, but how much is it going to be, you see? I told him how much. He says, when can you start? I said, Monday. And he says, the money will be in your company's account on Monday morning, which it was. And that's how we started.
And this trust made for a wholly unique show, which, like any good art, was made to impress future Letterboxd power users but pissed off the typical audiences of its day. One of the show's directors, Don Chaffee, talks about how his local pub would fill every Sunday after drinkers had been watching the evening's Prisoner episode.
An almighty row would break out with people yelling at me about all this rubbish I'd been making.
One of the things that is frustrating about making a piece of entertainment is trying to make it appeal to everybody. I think this is fatal. I don't think you can do that.
I worship at the altar of that quote, but as I'm fully aware, pushing the envelope can easily go too far, with unlimited control and not enough people telling you no, or maybe you just choosing to tune them out. In episode 4, Free For All, the immorality of cynical, do-nothing politicians is shown to be almost a sort of bad thing, as Six runs for the position of number 2 and is transformed into an alcoholic madman. The most relevant commentary for me here is in his interactions with the press on the campaign trail. Despite answering no comment to every question the village newspaper asks him, an article is published filled with fabricated quotes titled "Number 6 Speaks His Mind." And now's when I should point out that the photo in the paper, the same photo that's paraded all around town this entire episode, the same photo that's featured on his file in the intro sequence, was Patrick McGoohan's actual publicity photo at the time. And that's because this is an extra autobiographical episode. McGoohan was driven to the field of acting from a young age, but quickly detested the fame it brought. Call me an actor and I'm flattered. A star can be a mere personality. It takes work to become an actor. He hated posing with Hollywood starlets and his contractual obligation to be part of this studio publicity machine. Speaking in an interview in 1958 about 2 of his then recent films, he said, "Those films were not good. The love scenes in Hell Drivers were done the same as the truck scenes. And no one's gonna pretend that The Gypsy and the Gentleman is a classical piece of work." Have you ever heard an actor say something like that on a press junket? And this was before he had established himself enough to be untouchable. He was still coming up. The studio he made those films with, Rank, named so because their films were absolutely rank, tried to spin his open distaste for the system and the work it produced as the actions of a rebel and a brute, well suited for playing their villains, as he often did. Speaking on that designation, he responded, "I hope to be a constructive rebel." And then, more frustrated, "I'm not a tough guy and I'm not a beast. I'm soft-hearted, gentle, and understanding. I don't even beat my wife." What? He said he doesn't. After Danger Man launched him into stardom, he started looking out his window and seeing paparazzi at his house, taking pictures of his wife doing the dishes through the window and his young daughters swimming. He tried building a fence to keep them out, but it was deemed against local ordinance and had to be demolished. This protectiveness of his family was a core value. A magazine article titled "Leave My Family Out of This" claimed, "He will not answer searching questions about his family, will not permit a newspaper or magazine photographer to cross his doorstep." A writer who traveled all the way from Los Angeles to England was rewarded with a 4-word exclusive interview. Mind your own business. More and more, he refused to take interactions with the tabloids on their terms. His first press event, as The Prisoner was set to begin airing, was an absurdist caged interview where journalists tepidly volleyed questions about the show, to which McGoohan shouted back non-answers and other questions. Can you blame him? Are we entitled to every thought and moment of his and everyone close to him because he's on TV? Who could go through all that and not come out with a grudge against the tabloids and the studio system that enables them? Fame is a curse, and McGoohan got the full King Tut. The internet told me that was the #1 biggest curse. Episode 5, The Schizoid Man, opens with Six helping a woman numbered 24 practice her mind reading.
A square. No, a cross. No, a square. Definitely.
You sure it's a square?
Yes. I don't know what I'd have done without your help. Nobody else believed in me.
She's getting such accurate results that she wonders if they might have a psychic link. But before they can find out, Two enacts his plan of introducing a fake white-coated Six to impersonate the real Six, and then convince Six that their roles are actually reversed, that he is not himself. He's the plant here to make white-coated Six doubt himself. Trying to make Six think he's crazy, of course, influenced our modern concept of gaslighting. Oh, you think it didn't? You're insane! Oh, this joke seems played out to you? No, it doesn't! The part that causes a genuine hurdle for Six is that the new white-coated Six is this absolute Chad. More Six than the real Six, the version of Six that he wishes he was. And when it comes time for Six to prove he's the original Six, he brings in 24 to demonstrate their specific psychic link from earlier. But in a pivotal moment, it goes poorly, making him question his reality while painfully proving to us that she was in on the plan the whole time. The writer of this episode, Terrence Feely, had different plans for this moment. He originally wanted Six to be romantically involved with 24, making her deception cut deeper, and the test to find out which Six was real was originally going to be a kiss. But McGoohan refused to be romantic with anyone on screen who wasn't his real-life wife as part of his strong personal principles. In fact, when his previous show Danger Man was first pitched to him, John Drake 1 shot people and 2 had sex with a new woman every episode, and he immediately demanded they remove both concepts from the show. This was as unheard of then as it is today. One TV exec responded to the anti-sex, anti-violence clauses in his contract with,
"A celibate spy. Why don't we go the whole way and hire a monk?"
So where do these values come from? In a questionnaire from a fan asked who his greatest influence is, he responded, Jesus Christ. So now we know he's Christian. And asked his biggest disappointment, he responded, living with myself. So now we know he's Catholic. In fact, Danger Man producer Sidney Cole described him as
a very fervent Roman Catholic, which meant he had a very fervent sense of sin. He always refused to kiss a woman, even if they were supposed to be in a scene which implied some degree of intimacy between them. I asked him once why this was so, and he said he didn't want his children asking their mother, "Why is Daddy kissing that strange woman?"
In an especially irate interview later in life, he lamented our culture's attitude towards immoral behavior. Suddenly there's Mick Jagger, and he says marriage is for the birds, so let's have sex, fellows, it don't mean nothing. Aware of the response he might get for countering the free love 60s with an attitude of caged respect, he said, "You've got to offend a huge mass to save the world." This was something he knew wasn't going to make him the most friends or new fans, but his morals were important to him. They were actually so important to him that he turned down being the first James Bond. According to some sources, he turned down being the second James Bond too when they were looking for Sean Connery's replacement. He's given a lot of answers over the years for why he didn't take that life-changing part. According to the unbiased National Catholic Register, he explains, "I thought there was too much emphasis on sex and violence. It has an insidious and powerful influence on children. Would you like your son to grow up to be like James Bond?" I mean, yes. Since I hold these views strongly as an individual and parent, I didn't see how I could contribute to the very things to which I objected. He also held onto the idea that the plan for the films wasn't accurate enough to Bond. The real James Bond, the character in the books, had some interesting concepts about him. None of that was in the script. It was just the girls and the guns and the villains. And the stunts. He also said, "I don't mind if sex and violence are an essential part of the character, but I hate to see them dragged in as a gimmick." I will say, sex is not an essential part of my character, but I still reserve the right to put a sex scene in any video at any moment. And reminder, this video's better on Nebula, a platform me and my friends made so we could have sex uncensored. Is that right? I just assumed. McGoohan stated that every hero since Jesus Christ has been moral. He wasn't a coward. Like John Drake, he, capital H, fought his battles fiercely but honorably. I hope it won't sound blasphemous when I say that I think he might have enjoyed a program like Danger Man. Which of course influenced Justin Bieber saying Anne Frank would have been a believer. I honestly think this aspect of McGoohan is cool. Living by his principles so strongly that he turned down leading a major franchise at a time before The Prisoner when it genuinely would have changed the course of his career, that absolutely gets my respect. And he seemed to be able to work around it. In an awesome Catholic loophole, McGoohan once appeared on stage in Ring for Caddy with his wife Joan playing the part of his girlfriend. You can do whatever freaky business you want on that stage and God can't say shit! He wasn't perfect about it though. He ended up kissing his fellow actress on Nor the Moon by Night and was so distraught he got drunk and crashed his car. And in the time of Danger Man, an article revealed one co-star improvised a kiss with McGoohan and he flipped out, screaming, "That wasn't in the script! Nobody gets in a clinch with John Drake, nobody!" Then seized the film and burned it. He later apologized to the crew at the studio bar and when interviewed about it said, "I just can't go around necking with women. I'm a happily married man." To me, a kiss is something magic and meaningful, not just an action to satisfy the whim of a scriptwriter or TV director. I act the way I do for one very simple reason. My daughters. I'm trying to protect them in the only way I know how. By setting a good example. I am strict with the younger ones. They have to look at the papers and tick what shows they want to watch. After a program is over, they switch off and we have a sensible discussion on what they've seen. And that way TV helps them think, instead of giving them brains like vacuum cleaners to suck every scrap of muck and dirt that's going. I respect this approach just so much, actually. Mike Dan of CBS once asked, confused after his first brush with the prisoner, what were all those people doing who were wandering around in the caves in that village place? First off, awesome question, and McGowan just responded, well, they've been watching too much television. Mostly a joke, but also a decent read of the show. He had a lot of opinions on the role of television in our world. My theory was very simple. I felt that television was a guest in one's home and should behave like a guest. So therefore, for young people watching Danger Man, I'd rather they see a hero than an anti-hero. He also said, TV is like another parent. It has an insidious and powerful influence on children. So TV is like a guest in your home who's your dad. It's an outside influence welcomed in and trusted and empowered to boss the kids around. And McGowan takes his kids deadly seriously, saying this, if I were offered £1 million, that's British for money by the way, to make the greatest film in the world and I couldn't take my family with me, I'd turn it down. Ambition obscures everything else. You can see the ambitious everywhere, surrounded by broken marriages and alimonies. That outlook I completely agree with. I, like anyone, can get lost in the dream. Blinders on as I careen recklessly towards, fuck! He was, by all accounts, very sweet with his daughters. He made films with them, writing scripts and shooting them on 8mm as professionally as possible as a learning and bonding exercise. He even wrote a full screenplay and produced it with just his family, with his teenage daughter Catherine directing because she was thinking about doing that with her life. Call sheets, schedules, and everything with an all-family cast and McGowan playing the villain. That is an incredibly endearing portrait of a principled man, living according to his beliefs and making a good life for those he's responsible for. And speaking of good moral values, I've got new merch dropping today. It's inspired by classic school library posters with art by incredibly talented friend of the show, Leo Mafra. They celebrate reading in all its forms, because who doesn't love the library? Although I do want to be clear, this doesn't support the library at all, except in a general brand awareness sense. There's a shirt, a hat, posters, and stickers, and a pin. It supports me and supports the artist, and as a bonus, they're possessions that you get to possess. Thanks for giving them a look. We're super proud of how they turned out. Bart, PK, what do you think of these things? You're on them.
I can't get enough. I stare at mine for hours a day.
And what about you, PK? You're like sitting by a tree reading the Communist Manifesto. Does it remind you of your old home? How's that for you to revisit emotionally?
Tough.
Yeah? Well, it shouldn't be for you. In episode 6, The General, we see the same number 2 who was at most killed, at least fired back in episode 3. But he's looking less desperate here than he did back then. This leads some to think that this episode actually takes place before episode 3, and the potentially mind-ruining tactics he employed in A, B, and C are because the less direct plan here in The General doesn't pay off. The plot starts with the introduction of a new speed learn technology that offers
a university-level degree in 3 minutes.
It's improbable.
But not impossible.
Nothing's impossible in this place.
Most of the villagers are enrolled, and we see them after a brief brainwashing sequence spouting historical factoids and reciting dates to each other in a knowing facsimile of the exact kind of life our system of education prepares us for.
Good morning. Nice day again.
Be nice again tomorrow.
What happened in 1878?
1878, Eastern Romania was declared an autonomous province of the Turkish Empire.
This episode helps seed another prisoner core theme, the misuse of scientific invention and technology, letting the wrong powers abuse what could be humanity-improving developments.
I have an urgent message for you. You are being tricked. Speed learn is an abomination. It is slavery. If you wish to be free, there is only one way. Destroy the General.
Even this number 2, whom we know to be more science-minded than his counterparts, laments this.
Probably the most important human experiment we've ever had to conduct, sir. It's treated like a military exercise.
6 attempts to stop speed learn by infiltrating the education department using a covert technique he picked up from Special Agent Bugs Bunny. But the infiltration fails, and he's taken in to be introduced to the General, Speed Learn's biggest proponent. Like 6, we're expecting to meet a guy, like maybe a military guy, or a science guy, or even like a girl guy, but definitely like a human-type guy. But instead, it's not only a classic you thought it was a guy but it was a computer type reveal, but also a supercomputer who can supposedly answer any question posed to it. Before they can ask it who 6 has been working with, which would expose his notably trustworthy ally this episode, rare as it is, our man claims to have a simple 3-letter question the General could never answer. I heroically tried to use this technique to take care of our AI problem that Earth has going on right now, but it didn't take. Does anyone know why the language models based off of everything we've ever posted or commented online ended up having like this annoying dog shit personality? Weird. Anyway, the blah blah philosophical stuff has all been resolved, and now it's time for the highlight of any Prisoner episode, the single mandatory grunt fight. Almost every episode of The Prisoner features exactly one brief fight, and almost all of those are with random village grunts, and almost all of those he wins easily. If he doesn't, it's only because he was so outnumbered or otherwise impaired. It feels to me like they're only there to meet some late 60s expectation of excitement per episode, and my real question is how McGoohan balanced that with his anti-violence stance and this fundamentally pacifist show. It's not murder, and he's always defending himself, but you gotta admit it glorifies violence a little bit to have him be so good at it and let it be an important step in achieving so many of his goals. This isn't to say, gotcha McGoohan, you actually don't hate violence, but it does make me wonder, were there parts of himself he was selling for this? Was the check maybe not so blank, and he had to let little parts go so that he could make the rest of the show about what he really wanted? Was it really just a gimmick, the rare, mainstream exciting element of this show included to placate broader audiences? I personally believe that this show would not have gone as off the rails as it did at the end if he did not have nearly complete control over it. So if we say it is consistently his vision, what aren't we seeing about the violence? The village authorities expressly forbid harming Six, like we talked about. They think themselves above that they could break his mind non-violently, and yet they send goons after him every episode. I think they're somewhat in denial about their moral superiority, not just in their excitement to utilize goons, but in the idea that the psychological violence they enact on Six is any better than physical violence. Is goading Six into self-defense every episode, making the pacifist violent, an episode-to-episode win for them? Is this less about his fighting capabilities and more about every fight dehumanizing him, reducing him to that brute after all? These are all just questions for now, but we'll get more to chew on later. Episode 7, Many Happy Returns, is one of my absolute favorite episodes. It starts with Six waking up to find the entire village empty and silent all the way down to number 2's iconic chair. He takes the opportunity to hoof it to the border, but discovers the mountains are impassable, so once again he tries to escape by sea. We watch him sail for 18 days, journaling and using a handcrafted compass to keep track of his route, and eventually, hopefully, reverse engineer the location of the village. Obstacles he has to overcome include a passing boat of pirates that he has to outsmart and defeat, and a police checkpoint he has to smuggle himself through, but eventually he actually does make it back to London. At this point, we trust the show so little that we find it more likely that the village created a full-size replica of London than that they've actually allowed this to happen. He returns home to find a Mrs. Butterworth driving his iconic weird little car and living in his house.
Come here.
He's put off by her for obvious reasons, but she treats him with complete respect, feeding and clothing him with empathy to his situation. When he asks her the date, she says March 18th, and he says,
"Tomorrow's my birthday."
He heads into his old office we've seen in the intro sequence and shows some old associates the photos he took of the village before he left. They work together using his travel notes to deduce a possible location of the village.
Coast of Morocco, southwest of Portugal and Spain.
And they set out to go find it, but in a blink and you'll miss it moment as Six prepares to take off, we see a mysterious man in a milkman outfit switch places with Six's designated pilot. The location they determine seems to be real because even with the planted pilot, they follow Six's cartography and directions to get to the village. But when they do, the pilot hits him with this.
Be seeing you.
He lands safely on the village beach and heads back home in distraught silence. And when he gets there, we feel the knife twist. The woman staying at his home was the current number 2, and she orchestrated this entire brutal journey. Him nearly dying over weeks on the ocean for a momentary glimpse at a home they'll never let him return to, followed by betrayal from those he trusted and wanted to reunite with, all as some kind of horrible gift, just in time for his birthday.
Many happy returns.
The big question left over here is just how in on it Six's former organization is. It's never overt, but we do catch one calling him Number 6 almost tauntingly.
You're a stubborn fellow, Number 6. James, you'll call me that once again and you're liable for a bout in hospital.
And there's maybe no greater indictment of his former bosses in the series than that he handed them the location of the village and they never followed up on it in 10 more episodes. But on the other hand, the pilot was switched out for a village ally rather than the regularly assigned pilot being in on it. So my takeaway is that in his organization, only certain higher-ups, including those he confided in this episode, are sympathetic to the village, and they alone covered up the information Six brought them. They're operating in secrecy. This is a phenomenally freaky episode. Not a single word is uttered for 22 minutes straight, like me when I try to watch Seinfeld. They're talking so much, I can't get a word in edgewise. Kramer's sliding in, it's like, can I get a moment, please? I need to tell Jerry about what I saw on TV yesterday. How can Kramer have something so interesting going on again? And his making it back to London in episode 7 of 17, the entire time you're just waiting for the other shoe to drop, focusing intently on each scene to see the holes in this reality, the spot where he's getting screwed over. My dad showed The Prisoner to my sister and me when we were kids, and it scared the ass off of me from the first minute. I remember a sleepless night thinking about that man in the intro, casually walking up to gas 6 in his own home, and my dad at my bedside patiently talking me through it. He reminded me it was all on a set and helped me imagine the flubbed takes where he stumbled his way up on the stairs. And that once terrifying goon is such a doofus now, but isn't that how it always is as a kid? I just wasn't used to doofuses yet. Because no one had invented comment sections! I tricked you into commenting earlier, but I don't respect you! Comment if you're mad! This was a formatively odd show to see at a young age, completely incomparable to anything else I had access to. There's something safer about a Twilight Zone, with one-off episodes that are done at the end, versus one character being put through more and more hell as the show and his torment marches on. And it being the only 60s TV show I had really seen, there's something in the way it looks and sounds that just burrowed deep into my child psyche. I hadn't rewatched it before this video, but I never forgot it either. It's a show of adventures and mysteries and action, but it is all through such a memorably creepy, unsettling lens. And that fear, that adrenaline, it just helped everything else I liked about it stick harder in my mind. Like the strong allegories individual to each episode, and the value that leaving questions open-ended adds to the show's staying power. I may have watched more Viva La Bam as a kid, but I sure don't remember it as much, and that's because it resolved its core questions too quickly.
Now, Marja, what will he do next? Whatever the fuck I want.
Episode 8, Dance of the Dead, has been dubbed by some as the women's episode because it's the one episode of the show with a sizable female cast. Women are generally not painted great in this show, mostly hollow characters that exist to deceive Number 6.
Never trust a woman, even the four-legged variety.
But here we get a formidable, fleshed-out female Number 2 with a unique approach to her task.
You can't force it out of this man, he's not like the others.
I would have made him talk. Every man has his breaking point.
I don't want him broken. He must be won over. It may seem a long process to your practical mind, but this man has a future with us.
In the episode, he finds a beached body carrying a radio and attempts to use it to make contact with the outside world. But he's soon found out and is brought on trial for his radio crimes, like that Frasier episode where he played that frequency that made all those dogs die. Notable moments include the revelation that the village will be altering a dead body to resemble Six to convince the outside world he's moved from missing to dead, the discovery of a computer thought to be the way the village communicates with Number 1, and a death sentence verdict being carried out by everyone in the village. Dance of the Dead was only the 4th Prisoner episode they shot, but there are already some serious concerns being raised on set. Norma West, who played one of the episode's wardens, Number 240, bowl of smoke. Said of McGowan,
he was in a state of exhaustion and really refusing at that stage to delegate responsibility. He was taking everything on himself, even down to composing the music. He never went home. He slept in his dressing room and hardly ate.
To be fair, he didn't quite compose the music, but he did have a lot of input.
What was actually a very weak theme tune. And it wasn't until Pat got into the box and I could see him going on and on and on at Ron Grain, you've got to beef it up, you've got to beef it up.
And when you can't beef it up anymore, add thunder sounds. He was giving everything to this project. Some of the crew respected his commitment, and others were put off by it, but pretty much everyone could agree he was working himself to death. sleeping 3 hours a night to get this show made at his absurdly high standard of quality. The word television was supposedly banned on set, as McGoohan wanted the crew in a more cinematic frame of mind, which was a pretty new approach to the medium. McGoohan said, "I must have individuality in everything I do. I question everything. I don't accept anything on face value. I argue because by arguing something good often results. In private life, I've been known to lose my temper, but if it was the result of working too hard, I always try to go back to what caused it and put it right. I'm not ashamed to admit that I do have a temper. It's essential sometimes." A common sentiment from all our favorite tormented geniuses. He may have been against the blind ambition in principle, but in practice, it's clear he was getting lost in his lofty goals for the series. Darren Nesbitt, who plays a number 2 later in the series, claimed,
"Pat was having or going to have a nervous breakdown. Everybody thought the same."
But at this stage, with people above and below him depending on him to deliver this show, and his refusing to compromise his vision for it, he was moving at too fast of a rate to reevaluate the process. All he could do was keep going. As Nesbitt put it,
"You can't let up when you're in charge."
Episode 9, Checkmate, is not the most subtle metaphor the show has up its sleeve, but it's a valuable one. It starts with Six participating in a human chess game where the teams are unmarked, demonstrating the struggles we'll explore in the episode about telling the difference between the two opposing sides in the village, prisoners and wardens. Six's place in the chess match is as the White Queen's pawn, which is a reference to Alice's position in Alice in Wonderland. This particular bit influenced how every fucking thing where someone goes somewhere has to have an overt Alice in Wonderland reference, like the book is in the shot or even the character's name being Alice. Wow, that is so cool. It's like how Alice went somewhere. Wow, that's so smart because they're going somewhere, like Alice, the original person to go somewhere.
Wish I could find that rabbit hole and tumble away to Wonderland.
Fuck!
Yeah, I can't believe they put that in the game.
Damn!
Do they think we're that fucking stupid?
Oh my god!
Oh my god, is this it?
I'm being killed! I'm being killed! I'm being killed!
Oh, tragic.
Oh, it sucked so much.
There's nothing we can do.
It sucked.
It is deserved.
I'm dying because it sucked. The story culminates in Six teaming up with the rebellious Rook from the chess game to overthrow Two and escape. But as the plan comes together, he discovers Rook was setting him up and turning him in. But Rook didn't do it out of loyalty to the village, he did it because he thought that Six was the one betraying him. The episode ends with Rover grabbing Six and a shot of the proverbial pawn getting placed back on the board. It's a straightforward allegory that clarifies the dynamics of the village we've already been seeing. It's maybe a little simple by modern TV standards, showing not everything about the show has aged well.
And here he is, our very own Epstein.
But it is worth noting one area where the show completely holds up. It's memeability. For more, let's hear from my editor and YouTuber in his own right, meme expert and relatively young person, Toad Church. Toad?
Are you really doing this? I thought you were kidding when you said I had to do this. Right, so Leo does raise a really interesting point. The concept of memeability, if that's what you want to call it, is really important for TV shows nowadays. The world of TV marketing has completely changed since The Prisoner came out. Relatability is now the name of the game. If I can't make a dozen awesome reaction images out of just one episode of your show, it's worthless to me. It's because of this that Hollywood ad executives have made a battlefield out of the tenor GIF keyboard. If you go to the built-in GIF search bar in Twitter, Discord, or iMessage, you can see for yourself. There are hundreds of boring, forgettable TV shows and movies with tons of search results, just because every streaming service now has teams of people making GIFs for promo material. You can always tell when a GIF is astroturfed because they'll put the name of the streamer big as hell in the corner, or they'll put a hashtag somewhere, or the text will have like this weird blockbuster trailer look to it. They don't know how to blend in. Whether we like it or not, shitposting is a method of youth outreach, and every brand is wise to this now. That doesn't mean they're good at it, but you can see why they want to try to be. GIFs and reaction images are how us dumb kids communicate everything. And becoming a meme can culturally revive a property among younger generations. Just look at what happened to American Psycho, or Breaking Bad, or Columbo. All this to say, I'd like to see it happen for The Prisoner. I mean, sure, it's a classic show, cultural landmark, one of a kind, influenced the medium for years to come, but I'm 19 years old, man. I wasn't around when this thing was airing. I'd never heard of it before, neither had any of my friends. And what do you know? Look up The Prisoner on tenor GIF search. Not that many results. And a lot of them are just people in regular prison. Not great SEO. I know that GIFs aren't a guaranteed barometer for cultural relevancy, but there's a generation gap here. The truth is that I never would have watched this show if it weren't my job to edit an hour-long documentary about it. I don't know if I would have even given it a shot. I mean, why would I watch anything from the 1960s when instead I could just watch Instagram Reels, which, as we all know, is better than movies? But I'm happy I watched The Prisoner. It's an amazing show. There's nothing else like it. It's unique, it's exciting, it's colorful, it's weird, it's profound, it's free on YouTube in full HD. That's how old it is. It's a show I think more young people should watch. And furthermore, I think it's a show they would watch if they only knew it existed. So, you know what? If this is how the marketing game is played nowadays, so be it. Consider this a call to arms. All you young people out there, watch the show, tell your friends, post about it, and make some fucking GIFs. I don't know. I actually even got a few for you to use. I'll put them on screen. You can just, do whatever you want with them. All right. So I think that's about it for me. I'm going to pass it back over to Leo. You can subscribe to my channel if you want. It's at Toad Church. I do all kinds of stuff over there. And I'm just going to get back to my regular schedule of laying down and watching Instagram Reels. So, bye. Oh my God, this fucking video is going to be an hour long. Who is going to watch this?
Episode 10, Hammer Into Anvil, begins with 2 tormenting number 73, until she eventually commits suicide. 6 tries to save her, which sparks a particularly personal rivalry between him and this 2.
Du musst Amboss oder Hammer sein.
You must be anvil or hammer.
I see you know your Goethe.
And you see me as the anvil?
Precisely. I am going to hammer you.
But as George Orwell put it in Politics in the English Language,
it's always the anvil that breaks the hammer, never the other way about.
A quote which is just so delightfully Orwellian, by the way. This too is the same actor who played Thorpe, one of Six's former colleagues in Many Happy Returns. And though it's not clear whether it's the same character, them potentially having that history gives some fun weight to their Orwellian-esque butting of heads here.
I think it's kind of Kafka-esque too.
Whoa! Nice! That's fire.
Hell yeah.
Wow. Six's plan is to finally use his constant surveillance to his advantage, acting extremely suspiciously and even sending a coded message he lets get intercepted regarding 2 being unstable. He's sowing the seed that he's a plant, here to observe number 2, which is such a simple, clever way to use the secrecy of the village against them.
Who is this? Your report on number 2, Doctor. Number 2? What are you talking about? Who is this speaking?
I understand. You'd rather not talk on the telephone.
This is also the only time I noticed where 6 refers to himself as number 6, and it's only because he's trying to convince 2 that he is not actually number 6.
I know who you are.
I'm number 6.
No.
This all culminates in a confrontation where 2 lays out the evidence he's collected of 6's subterfuge, the proof that 6 is a plant here to check on him, but 6 plays his final card.
What would have been your first duty as a loyal citizen? Not to interfere. But you did interfere. You have admitted it yourself. There is a name for that. Sabotage. No. Who are you working for, number 2?
6 then tells 2 the logical conclusion of such a deep failure. 2's got to call the home office and tell them it's time to send his own replacement. In the script, he originally visited number 73's grave at the end, which highlighted more visually this turning point in the series. He's starting to step up as a hero to these people, realizing just how dire it is that there are so many in the village in the same situation as himself. The only difference between them is they don't all have his skills for trickery. 6's uncanny ability to act like someone who's good at acting is actually pulled from McGowan himself, who in real life was a good acting actor. Peter Graham Scott, who directed the episode The General, credited the show's success pretty much entirely to his exceptional stage presence.
Patrick had this intensity. This is what makes him such a remarkable actor. I mean, The Prisoner, if you look at the stories, they're tosh.
Oh, high praise!
Nobody ever said it was rubbish.
Oh, that's British for bad, I guess.
It was all to do with those penetrating blue eyes, telling you this is the truth. Be sure this is truth.
As McGowan came up in the theater world, his performances were consistently remarkable. Kenneth Tynan wrote about his acting in Orson Welles' short-lived Moby Dick for the Sunday Observer in 1955.
There is a fine portrayal of Starbuck, the mate who fights against Ahab's fanaticism, by Patrick McGowan. He is a first-rate actor who, while the star's performance remains a work in progress, is giving the ablest characterization of the evening.
Oh, cancelled. Welles became something of a mentor to McGowan in this era, and it's possible his famous grudge against television rubbed off on McGowan, who recalls him describing it as, quote,
the most dangerous thing on earth.
Okay, Tell me you haven't seen me dual wielding without telling me you haven't seen me dual wielding. McGowan himself regards his performance as the disturbed priest Brand in the play of the same name as the best one of his career, retiring from the theater for 25 years afterward. Peter Sallis co-starred in that production and had this to say.
It was the most exciting first night that I've ever had anything to do with. I used to stand in the wings every night because I thought I'm never going to see better acting than this as long as I live.
But he also said of working with him,
Patrick has the inability to compromise over anything.
Similarly, when Patrick McGowan was asked if he was at all like Pastor Brand, he replied, the parallel is there certainly, the all or nothing business. Even script editor George Markstein, who Patrick butted heads with before his departure from the show, said years later,
he was a superb actor, one of the best TV produced. He had immense ability, but he was an egomaniac. All actors are.
And after the disastrous production of the next episode, this will seem like a very light insult. Episode 11, It's Your Funeral, is not my favorite episode. It's just a little dry and uninteresting, and in the biggest insult I could ever levy at an episode of this show, it feels like it could be an episode of a different show. It's about an assassination plot on number 2 on the day of his retirement that Six feels the need to stop because if it's successful, the whole village would be punished. Uncharacteristic narc vibes from him. Here's a few of the interesting parts. Six spends part of his day playing chess with the elderly, which is something Patrick did in real life when he worked at a chicken farm in his youth. There's an implication that this older 2 is the one real 2 and all the others have been stand-ins while he's away. And before Six successfully foils the plot and saves the older 2, he has a fight with number 100, played by Mark Eden, who claimed that Patrick lost control while shooting and started strangling him for real.
There was a bit where he had to get on top of me and strangle me. And he was really strangling me. There was a way of doing it, without actually hurting you. And I looked up and I could see these mad eyes looking down at me, and I thought, oh, and his face was contorted with rage, and he was like, you're gonna see all this. And he's a big man, but it took me every effort, every ounce of strength I had to push him off.
Patrick was miserable for the shooting of this episode and brought everyone else down with him, including his co-lead for the episode, Annette Andre.
I hated every single minute of it. Really, I think it was down to Patrick, totally. Patrick, well, it's no secret that I just loathed Patrick from the minute I started. I tried to be nice, and he doesn't work with actresses at all well. He had a crashing row with Bob Asher and tore him apart in front of the entire studio. Crew, everything. Then on the next day I went to my agent and said, I can't stand this. However, I finished the whole thing, but I hated that. I hated the whole thing.
Patrick and Andre shared a scene, and as they were wrapping, he said to her, I suppose you think that was good. Then the crew fell silent and watched as McGowan proceeded to tell her how horrible her performance had been. He also got into a strange fight with Darren Nesbitt, the younger number 2.
McGowan came up to me and he said, this is not a comedy. Why are you doing it? You look like you don't know what it's about. I said, I've got no bloody idea what it's about. You tell me what it's about. He said, well, I'm not sure.
Conditions on set were getting worse, but this behavior wasn't out of nowhere. Ian Rakoff, a writer on the show, once had an extremely unpleasant meeting with Patrick, where for the first 5 minutes he said nothing, just angrily paced around and slammed the table.
My heart was beating so fast and my head was pounding so much, I was worried that I might pass out.
Then he learned that Patrick had forgotten what the purpose of their appointment even was, and he just happened to be mad about something else. After The Prisoner, McGowan would attempt to make Brand as a TV movie with ITC, and got £900,000 to do it, but he wanted $1 million, because the $1 million is magic. And so he went to see his benefactor Lou Grade, thinking their good working relationship would make it a done deal. But Grade denied the request because he knew they didn't need another £100,000. Even by McGowan's own admission, it was just out of some belief that there's something special about having $1 million. And so as scriptwriter Terrence Feely puts it, McGowan leapt onto Lou Grade's desk and
kicked everything off into the 4 corners of the room, with the result that when he came in next morning, we not only didn't have the $1 million, we didn't have the $900,000 either.
There are as many accounts of him being a joy and inspiration to work with as there are of him being a nightmare, which is not a defense, it's actually a pretty shitty batting average. It's one thing to take everything on in a project, to throw yourself into it completely if you're only fucking your own life up, but it rarely works out that way. Being the solo auteur with a singular vision is plenty exciting until the situation develops into an unprofessionally shitty work environment, a glum, scary place to be for everyone involved. And now we're here in that place, stuck, where the personal pain and the professional disorganization are tied up in knots with no time to spare to unravel them. Episode 12 is one of only a few that were directed by McGoohan. It's hard not to read into which episodes he chose to direct. Free for All, about his relationship with the press, Many Happy Returns, about the illusion of escape, the last 2 episodes of the series, which are the most autobiographical, personal, unique pieces of television ever filmed, but we'll get to that later, and this one, A Change of Mind, a story about being lobotomized by the dominating social group for not fitting in. It starts with him training in his handmade gym in the woods before he's ironically found by some Waldos and berated for not using the community gym like everyone else. Things get physical and he's threatened with a visit to the committee.
You'll face the committee for this.
He shows up to his appointment and we see how this process normally goes as number 93 exits his meeting with the committee.
I'm inadequate.
I'm inadequate.
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 Disharmonious.
Disharmonious.
I'm truly grateful.
I'm truly grateful.
Believe me.
Believe me.
Believe me. Believe me. Believe me.
Believe me.
Believe me. Believe me. Believe me. Believe me.
Believe me.
Despite this, or because of this, Six refuses to take this ridiculous committee seriously.
It is the duty of this committee to deal with complaints.
Complaints?
Your complaints.
Well done. I have several.
It may be worth noting that Patrick himself attended the Catholic Ratcliffe College, which had a prefect-run Committee of Privileges, where a panel of students' peers would dole out justice for minor infractions, which sounds similarly hard to take seriously. But it seems this problem is not going away when he gets written up in the tally-ho as being a subject for further investigation, and number 2 shows up at his house claiming to be uninvolved with the committee and simply respectful of their power. This story is more about the social group than the higher-ups. As it was put in the companion book, this is the least sympathetic portrayal of the villagers we get. This makes them look like a lost cause, their brainwashing complete, and eager to condemn anyone outside their sedated, subservient way of being. To solve Six's rebelliousness once and for all, 2 decides to give Six a lobotomy, removing the part of his brain that makes him so aggressive. We know this violates previous directives not to hurt him, which changes how we take in the story. We're always watching for little clues that this is all a trick. We also know as the viewer that most shows don't take out the main character's brain because characters typically require a brain to think through issues and make decisions. The lobotomy is a success, and we see a new stressless number 6 going about his day. But we also see little hints that he's still in there and has been avoiding taking the drugs they're trying to give him to convince him the surgery worked. To learn the details of this scheme, 6 hypnotizes number 86, an important skill in any spy's repertoire, especially if they can't seduce anyone because of their personal principles. 6 then convinces 2 he wants to make a speech publicly about how happy he is now that he's been socially converted. But the real plan is to call out number 2 as unmutual, with 86's help. And that's kind of funny, because you 86 stuff at a restaurant when it's not available for the evening. And now 86 herself is 86ing 2 for being unmutual, right? Right? Yeah, totally. Woo! Yeah, thank you. Six's plan was for the village to reject this notion of unmutualness, but the episode ends with them just excited that now they get to mutualize number 2.
What was that last joke about?
I don't know. I think I'm just gonna laugh because
you looked right at me. I didn't know what to do.
It's been a really long day on set. Thank you for the joke.
Thank you. Wow, you're so welcome. Wow. Some say this episode is a commentary on McCarthyism, and I think I'm going to say that too. The connection between the village's treatment of dissenters with America's rooting out and vilifying supposed communists is just one of many allegories in the show, and there's plenty of symbolic imagery as well. A piece from this episode specifically is that those umbrellas we've been seeing in villagers' hands every episode, perhaps representing a converted villager's perception of control and reliance as protection, are wielded as tools of violence to protect the state, or in this case, village. It's not like the umbrellas are there to block rain. Throughout the show's whole run, it only rained once in episode 3. And isn't that some fun little trivia for your next cocktail party? The show is overflowing with symbols like this, like that be seeing you hand signal, which could represent the village's overbearing authoritarian eye, or 3 6s for number of the beast, or could be meant to represent one number 6 because of how this whole operation seems to be in an unsettling way about him. There are also circles all throughout the show, with Rover and the many brainwashing lamps. But most interestingly to me, in the wheels of the penny farthing bicycle seen in the show's credits and throughout the village. This one ties into a core belief of Patrick's.
Do you feel you're being... I think we're progressing too fast. I think that we should pull back and consolidate the things that we've discovered.
We know what we must do. What must we do?
He once claimed in an interview that he came up with the penny farthing bicycle as an ironic symbol of that progress, and the desire to slow down the rate at which we're changing the world and ourselves. The penny farthing bicycle represents a simpler age. We live in an era where science is advancing so quickly you don't even have time to learn about the latest innovations before something new arises, making what you've learned obsolete. Everything is moving very fast, possibly too fast, before it's time. But what are the stakes of moving too fast? There's an alternate version of the end titles, miraculously saved from an early press screener of episode 2 before the show ever aired on TV. After the bicycle's built, as it is in the regular end credits, we see the wheels dissolve into the Earth and the universe, and our planet swells before it comically, almost benignly, explodes.
I think progress is the biggest enemy on Earth apart from oneself. And that goes with oneself. They're a two-handed pair. With oneself and with progress, I think we're going to take good care of this planet shortly. They're making bigger and better bombs, faster planes, and all this stuff one day, I hate to say it, there's never been a weapon created yet on the face of the Earth that hasn't been used.
Conversely, Frank Marr, McGowan's stunt double and friend, claims the penny farthing bicycle actually did not represent anything.
It was just one of the strange props that were to decorate the village, and a lot has been attributed to it, with the benefit of hindsight.
For almost every story I'm discussing today, there's a quote from someone saying the opposite. Anything I mention here, I am pretty much choosing to make significant, and I choose to believe there is something to just about every image in this show, including the penny farthing bicycle. It just fits too neatly into the show's anti-war message, which episode 13, Do Not Forsake Me, Oh My Darling, builds on. In Do Not Forsake Me, Oh My Darling, which from now on I'll simply refer to as DNFMOMD for expediency, the bad guys are looking for a missing inventor, Professor Seltzman, who Six was the last agent to make contact with. They use technology they already have of Seltzman's to put the Colonel's mind in Six's body so they can reach out to Seltzman in the form of someone he trusts. But Six also gets dropped into his old flat in the Colonel's body, and before he races to find Seltzman, he has to gradually convince his fiancée Janet that it's really him in this new body. The reason for the body swap is that Patrick was off shooting Ice Station Zebra at the time of production. This lack of oversight while our lead actor was away gives us the opportunity to watch Six technically kiss his fiancée Janet, despite Patrick's unwillingness to kiss a non-wife on screen. This same lack of oversight also gives us this mythical fiancée Janet in the first place, who we never see at any other point in the series. He's not going on vacation with her in the intro, he doesn't try and find her when he escapes the village in Many Happy Returns. Never. Seltzman eventually gets brought in from his idyllic new life as a barber in the Austrian countryside because while they have his tech to swap minds, they don't know how to undo it and swap them back. They need Seltzman for this, and then presumably to stay at the village in servitude for whatever nefarious ideas they can cook up in the future. Seltzman tells them he needs to be connected as a catalyst for the two minds, and the three link up to swap their minds back to the bodies they belong in. But Seltzman is killed during the intense swapping process. So the Colonel heads off, bemoaning what seems to be a minor failure of the village, Seltzman's death an unfortunate accident in their plan. But then we get the final twist, Seltzman just escaped in the Colonel's body, and the Colonel died in Seltzman's body. In a cut bit from the original version of the script, we learn that the operation never needed 3 people. This secret swap was always part of the plan, and whoever fought the hardest could have escaped in their mind battle. As Six puts it, it could have been me. But I felt it should be Seltzman, because I'm going to escape anyway. So here in the village's disrespect of scientific achievement and pursuit of high-speed progress, they've taken this humble genius who wanted nothing but to live the rest of his life in peace and tried to abuse and maximize the destructive power of his incredible brain. To the villains, this gifted human is seen as a tool for their agenda of subjugation. It all plays into this fear of unfettered pursuit of progress, this fear of the urgency with which the world is moving and the people that get taken advantage of along the way. Is this just an effective rebrand of a classic old guy way to think? Add some gravity and danger to the notion that phone bad, typewriter good. With what we know of the show's tumultuous production, it's easy to see how in the studio system, making this caliber of show at this rapid of pace plays into that deep, heartfelt wish for everything to slow down. To make a new, more destructive bomb for a bloodthirsty government, to make the most profits for a TV studio with the least overhead, these are both overeager pursuits born from the same society, where greed and dehumanization are dour routine. Next is episode 14, Living in Harmony, where number 6 is in Cowboy World. Now's probably a good time to say The Prisoner was only supposed to have 7 episodes.
You didn't initially want to do 17 films?
No, 7. As a serial as opposed to a series. And I thought that the concept of the thing would sustain for only 7. But then Lou Grade wanted to make his sale.
This was supposedly to sell the show in America, where we expect 24-episode seasons, versus Britain's 3-episode series. They don't like the word season because it reminds them of seasoning, and they don't like that. Those original 7 in Patty's order are as follows: Arrival, Free for All, Dance of the Dead, Checkmate, The Chimes of Big Ben, and the final 2, Once Upon a Time and Fallout. So not every episode is considered necessary to the arc of the show. There are plenty of fan-made must-watch Prisoner episode orders, and the Cowboy one appears on none of them. This influenced filler episodes in your favorite anime, specifically that episode of Cowboy Bebop right before the end, where instead of resolving the main plot, they take a detour to do a cowboy episode, and similarly, it actually kicks ass. It's a straightforward western for the most part, not even having the Prisoner's title card or intro, but instead starting with a cowboy recreation of the intro, with Sheriff Number 6 storming into the marshal's office and resigning from being a cowboy. He then gets roughed up by some grunts and brought to a quiet town he's never heard of, called Harmony. He heads to the pub where he has an intimidating meeting with a new figure, the Kid, played by Alexis Canner. Patrick was absolutely taken with Canner's performance here, bringing him back for other roles in future episodes, and giving his name a special spot in the credits, the only actor in this or any show to get a box around their name to show that they're special. Canner was a somewhat known figure in British broadcast television from a police drama called Softly Softly Task Force, but he described the move from mainstream television to The Prisoner as
like working in putty or plasticine, and then being asked to do the ceiling of the Sistine Chapel.
He is absolutely electrifying as the Kid, the guard of the town jail. He could be allegorical for any of the village's wardens, but I think it's fun to see him as this town's rover. He's pure id, an agent of those in charge, and he's completely non-verbal except for one scream, which to me just sounds rovery. Cowboy 6 is forced by the judge, the number 2 of Harmony, to become sheriff once more to save a woman named Kathy's life, and he accepts but somewhat maintains his pacifist ideals by refusing to carry a gun, like all the coolest characters in media: Brock Sampson, Batman, Steve Urkel. The judge sends the Kid to kidnap Kathy, but he ends up killing her after a pretty troubling assault scene. This leads 6 to turn in the badge but pick up a gun, killing the Kid in a duel and defending himself in a shootout with the judge's men that's still pretty fun to watch. But then he's shot by the judge and he has a strange reaction. An incredible move it is to have never shown the title The Prisoner or break the illusion in any way until now. If you randomly stumbled upon this episode as your first episode of the show, you would remember this twist for the rest of your life. He jogs back to the village in about 5 seconds and finds the supposed citizens of Harmony wearing the headsets they were using to pipe their voices into the cowboy set and manipulate the apparently very drugged up 6. Then 6 leaves, but we stay with the group for a rare unpacking of the episode's 6-cracking plot and why it failed. Number 8, the Kid, blames number 2, the judge, for creating the crisis moment too soon. While number 22, Kathy, is legitimately traumatized by what number 8 did to her, especially as they discuss how the plan was to act as they would in the real situation. Then the group, one by one feeling compelled to return to Harmony, meets in the saloon. The Kid strangles Kathy to death in about 5 seconds, only giving her time to tell 6,
"I wish it had been real,"
before dying of strangling-related complications. Then, having been driven mad and still fearfully referring to 2 as the judge, the Kid drops himself off the 7-foot railing and dies. These two are absurdly fragile to die this way, which first struck me only as a scene that didn't quite work as they hoped, and maybe them picturing a higher saloon loft when they wrote this in the script, but there might be something to them being as thin and destructible as their cardboard counterparts, especially as the lines blur between which is which. When The Prisoner first ran in the US in 1968, this episode was completely skipped, and not because it wasn't in a CBS executive's canon watch order. The original explanation given for the skip is that the use of hallucinogenic drugs violated CBS broadcasting standards, despite a good half of the episodes of this show centering around drugging this poor guy. A spokesman for CBS eventually confirmed that the real reason for skipping the episode was because of its pacifist, anti-war sentiment in a decidedly American setting, with the show set to air during the bloodiest year of the Vietnam War for American soldiers. A high mark in Patrick's pattern of eschewing social norms and enforcing his values against the studio's desire for what was marketable. Or, you know.
Because I wanted to do a Western, I'd never done one. I mean, it was short of a story. So we cooked that one up, and we wrote it in 4 days and shot it, you know. And it was fun. Yeah, it was fun. I mean, whatever you put into it, that's the reason for it.
Wait for it?
Then we sort of stuck the figures up and all that and put some other concepts in, which have other levels, sociological levels, which you can take what you want out of them.
Oh, I will, thank you. Undeniable to me the place this episode has in the pacifist message of the show, with an anti-gun Sheriff Six only being brought to fruitless action by unspeakable violence towards an innocent. Yeah, that'll get me hyped to participate in the Vietnam War. Not. Apocalypse later, please. Or even never would be great. Episode 15, The Girl Who Was Death, is considered a parody of the spy genre, but I think it straight up rocks. It was my favorite episode as a kid, and they said I was a treat to have in class. So, it starts with Six flipping through the pages of a book, which continues through every commercial break as a reminder that this is some kind of fable within the context of the show. This fable begins with an assassination at a cricket match, carried out by swapping the cricket ball, or Round Roger, for an exploding one to kill the striketeer at bat. We see Six's character in the story receive a secret record containing his mission briefing, which would influence Mission Impossible Rogue Nation, although the original Mission Impossible show probably did it first because god, everything is so old. The player who was killed was another agent, and Six is now sent to replace him in the cricket tournament, or Merlin's Landsmeet. They try to kill him with the same technique, but he's quick enough to catch the Round Roger and toss it deep Breadfield, finding a secret message in the remains that leads him to a bar. He enjoys a beer while he waits, which gradually, hilariously reveals the message, "You have just been poisoned." His solution is to quickly order a bunch of different alcohols to make himself vomit. An awesome, clever scene that most YouTubers would say was pointless because he could just stick a finger down his throat because they are allergic to having fun. The episode is a lot of fun spy antics like this, building up to a fight with some Napoleons who are trying to launch a nuke at London. Why Napoleons, you're asking? Well, fun fact, it was a change from the original script where they were supposed to be little Hitlers. After Six saves the day, we pull out to reveal this was him reading a storybook to some kids and improvising a spy story around the illustrations. Apparently Two's weak plan here was to see if he dropped his guard around the kids and maybe opened up about his real history. Number Two's name is like a poopy, and that name resonates thematically here because this plan was a sloppy, stinky little plopper. This episode was constructed this way because it was adapted from an unused Danger Man script, and even features the same actor playing the same minor character, Potter, from Danger Man. If you don't want anybody to think this is a continuation of Danger Man, these are a couple substantial mistakes to have made. But the thing I find most fascinating about this episode is a scene where he's at a theme park dressed as Sherlock Holmes. The production's reason for this is so it was easier to hide a body double for certain shots, but there's an undeniable pull from Patrick's real life here. In his biography, a childhood friend named James Blake shares a story about Patrick showing up at the boxing ring they both sparred at dressed as Sherlock Holmes as a bit to make his friends laugh. Then James challenged him to hop in the ring and promptly kicked Patrick's absolute ass. It's notable to me that he did not take this opportunity to alter this real, humbling event, coolly defeating the more established boxer. This is how it seems to have really gone down. He got slammed and humiliated in front of his friends. James says it got to the point the referee had to pull him off before it was over because Patrick was supposed to appear on stage that night. What are the odds of this happening independently and him thinking nothing of including it? I'm calling it a specific autobiographical note, maybe just because it was one less moment to invent out of thin air, but still undeniably relating his reality to the show. It might be a bit of inspiration in a vacuum, but I see no coincidence alongside all the other evidence we have seen and are about to see in the next episode. But before we get to that, let's answer the most important question we have here after an especially strange episode. What was Patrick smoking when he came up with this stuff? Let's throw it to my friend Bart for some theories. Bart?
Thanks, Leo. DMT, or dimethyltryptamine, is smokable and can offer not just vivid hallucinations, but total depersonalization, which could have influenced the notes on identity we see throughout the series. Conversely, crystal meth can be smoked out of a light bulb, which is the exact thing that pops up over your head when you have an idea. If it was simply weed, here are a few strains I think are likely. The standard late 60s loud, which helps your creativity and opens you up to surreal ideas. It's that shit that Willy Wonka was smoking.
Oh.
You could have been chiefing some green grass. It's a pretty heady high that makes your whole point of view shake. Imagine you're at a luau at Jake Gyllenhaal's house. It's kind of like that.
Yeah, we talked about this.
Or else Gummy Mummy is a sativa-dominant hybrid that actually makes the people around you want to ruin the things you've created, and when you smoke it, you're high forever.
Well, thank you, Bart. That's very insightful. All I know is, no one's better than anyone else at having ideas, and he must have been cheating at thinking. Patrick reportedly wrote episode 16, Once Upon a Time, in a 36-hour period. It is the episode he calls his favorite and far and away the most autobiographical. It is also 100% certifiably deranged. When props master Mickey O'Toole received the script, he didn't realize Patrick wrote it because he used a pen name, so Mickey went straight up to him after reading it and called it ridiculous, being too short and rubbish. And in his defense, this episode is entirely two men yelling gibberish at each other. Leo McKern, the most iconic number 2, returns here with a new approach to breaking 6.
I told you the last time you were using the wrong approach. I do it my way. Degree absolute.
The rules are off, and 6's well-being is no longer being considered. They're gonna make him snap at any cost, even if that means turning him into a baby.
Even as a child, there is something in your brain that is a puzzlement. I intend to discover it.
2 has brought him underneath his office, where we finally see the network of tunnels down there, bringing them to what's called the embryo room.
1 week. 1 teeny weeny week, my boy. Neither of us can leave. Till death do us part.
2 has set the timer for 1 week, where they'll run through the 7 ages of man, as Shakespeare once described.
All the world's a stage, and all the men and women merely players. They have their exits and their entrances, and one man in his time plays many parts.
That this has the trappings of a stage play is the first of many autobiographical elements in this episode. This one comes from Patrick's theater roots, which started all the way back when Patty, as his classmates called him, played Mr. Darcy in St. Vincent's Youth Center's production of Pride and Prejudice, attending school under the shadow of World War II. So number 2 runs him through his childhood, as recreated through their extensive file on his life, prodding him at points for more insight into 6's seemingly unbreakable psyche.
I'm your father. Do I ever say anything that makes you want to hate me?
At the end of this Billy Madison influencing rapid schooling technique, they make it to his graduation, hoping to grab him at the peak of his obedience to society and tactfully ask why he resigned.
Why did you resign?
I can't tell you that, sir.
Was it secret?
Secret?
And confidential?
No, sir.
Top secret.
When this fails, they go right back to square one, with just one small development.
I'm beginning to like him.
A baby once again, but with the same rebellious spirit, 6 refuses to even count up to his number.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 6, 5, 6, 5, 6, 5, 6, 5, 6, 5.
This continues for 1 full minute and has more of the temerity of an old Joe Biden.
Why?
Why, Pop? Why?
His life continues and he takes up boxing, as he did in real life, and interviews for a job at a bank, which is a job he really had. 6's mind is shattered for nearly this entire episode, and it makes for an unsettling watch. He's always been an especially capable character, and whenever we've seen him incompetent, it was only as part of a long-term deception. Here we pretty much see what he looks like broken, to the point that we even get some version of an answer for why he resigned.
Peace. For peace. You resigned for peace?
Yes, let me out. For peace of mind.
What? For peace of mind!
But this marks the beginning of 6 regaining control of his mind and turning the tables on 2, a known weakness in this degree absolute strategy. Here we see the exact moment he gains the upper hand.
8.
Why did you resign?
8.
Why?
6.
6.
Yeah? 4.
No.
2.
No.
1.
No.
0 go.
No.
I'm hungry.
What would you like?
Supper.
They take a clear-minded tour of the room until 2 discovers there's only 5 minutes left on the timer. 6 seizes the moment to lead 2 into the cage, which is revealed to be on the back of a truck. The butler then aids him in locking 2 in the cage, recognizing 6 as the new boss. 2 and 6 have one last screaming match as the timer ticks down, with 6 taunting him and an unrecognizable voice urging him to die.
7.
6.
6.
Die, 6, die! Die! Die!
3.
Die! Die!
1.
Die! Die!
Then, as it says in the shooting script for the episode, he dies. The supervisor, who we've seen throughout the series but I haven't found a place to mention, enters and joins in deferring to 6's authority, asking for next steps.
What you desire?
Number 1.
I'll take you.
And he does. leaving behind the empty embryo room as Twinkle Twinkle Little Star lands the moment. I'll be straight up that the autobiographical elements of this episode and The Prisoner in general might not be everything I'm making them out to be. We all put a bit of ourselves into our art, except for me, the only truly creative person. But I think it speaks to the degree to which Petit lost himself in this work until he couldn't be separated from it. You don't get to make another show where you play the main character who shares your backstory and worldview and birthday. This man knew he was making his opus about the issues that mattered to him most, affected him most. And as the show became its most autobiographical, the set also became its most miserable. Just ask the first Leo to ever be a little scared of Patty Mac, Leo McKern.
When he called me, you're a funny little fucker, aren't you? And I thought, oh, it's going to be that sort of relationship, unfortunately, and that was said in a bar before we even started the series.
He appreciated the show, liked the themes, but described Patty like this.
A dreadful bully, always shouting and screaming and yelling about the place and hurrying up and saving money.
And to be fair, the shoot for this episode was 8 9.5-hour days of him and Patty screaming in each other's faces. Patty tells this charming story about the time he went to check in and congratulate McKern on the performance so far.
And he was crawled up in the fetus position on his couch there. And he says, go away, go away. He said, I don't want to see you again. I said, what are you talking about? He said, I've just ordered 2 doctors, he said, and they're coming over. And they came over that afternoon, and he didn't work for 3 days. He'd gone. He cracked. And eventually Leo did come back, and we completed it. And also he was in the final episode, so he forgave me for everything.
This undoubtedly had gone too far, but the result was a hell of an episode.
You know who you are? A fool. What? Don't. Yes. No, don't. Yes, an idiot. No. I'll kill you. I'll die.
But that's it for episode 16, Once Upon a Time, one of the most unhinged hours of television ever produced. The next episode is the series finale, Fallout, and it's the single most unhinged hour of television ever produced.
I saw him on one occasion, and it was getting near the 17th episode, and I said, Pat, are you sure there's going to be an ending? He said, yes. And then he came to me at a later period and said, Lou, I just cannot find an ending. I've got too confused with the project.
Particularly, the long-expected revelation of Number One's identity had still not been decided. But he eventually did find an ending, and it starts right where the last episode left off, as the supervisor and the butler lead Six to meet Number One. After getting dressed back in his pre-Village clothes off a mannequin, as the intro to the Beatles' All You Need Is Love plays on the jukebox, and obviously we're on YouTube, so you're gonna have to take my word for it, they go through a door marked with the passive-aggressive, non-greeting welcome into what appears to be a missile control room with an empty throne in the middle. We see hooded, clan-like figures representing different groups like pacifist and anarchist, all applauding for Six's grand entrance, and it seems he's won.
We understand he survived the ultimate test.
Indeed.
Then he must no longer be referred to as number 6 or a number of any kind.
He has gloriously vindicated the right of the individual to be individual, and this assembly rises to you, sir.
As he takes the throne, still holding his complete distrust of the Village, it all feels almost condescending, and Six at this point is mildly amused by the proceedings. But to complete the ceremony for the transfer of ultimate power, they wheel in the apartment cage from the last episode, and unfortunately for Leo McKern, they bring his character back to life. By this point, while McKern was traumatized by his experience on the show, Alexis Canner, the kid in the cowboy episode, and a new character in this one, had become friendly with Patty, and in a night out at the pub was personally tasked with convincing McKern to return for one more episode. Canner went to see McKern and ended up promising to be there on set with him the entire time, making sure everything was okay. And by all accounts, he kept his promise, sitting there off screen for shots he wasn't in just to make McKern comfortable. Oddly sweet, and saddening that McKern needed this much to feel safe on set with Patty. The resuscitation involves shaving too clean, which seems like our most head-scratching allegory yet, until you learn that they just shot this episode way after the other one, and McKern actually looked like this now and they had to write around it. Canner plays number 48 here, who's been caught in youthful rebellion by the Village and given the chance to plead his case, but instead chooses to make a mockery of the whole thing.
Collarbone's connected to the neck bone, and the neck bone's connected to the head bone. Now hear that word of the Lord. 48! Them bones gonna walk around, them bones gonna walk around. Number 48!
After receiving a coded message from number 1, the president, as he seems to be called, has this back and forth with 48 that is a good indicator of most of the dialogue in this episode.
The bright light, Dad. Got a sign. Sign? The light. Light? The message. Then you went and gone. Why? Give it to me, baby. That's it. Give me the rest. Give all you want. Give. That's it. That's it. And take. That's it. Takes all you want. That's it. Take. That's it. Take. 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 Take.
It's not literally nonsense. There's clear points in there that are even a little on the nose. But imagine watching this with your 1960s nuclear family gathered around the TV, hot off the latest laugh-in. That is either nonsense or annoying. But fear not, 48 expertly segues the conversation back into being about dry bones.
The bones is yours, Dad. They came from you, my daddy. Confess. Now you hip. Hip, Dad. Hip. Confess. And a hip bone. Confess. And a thigh bone. Confess. Shin bone, knee bone. Confess. Back bone, all yours, Dad. Confess. Knee bone.
Well, it's Zico, crack down, dry bones is Zico, crack down, dry bones is Zico, crack down, dry bones. Now hear the word of the Lord.
The Resuscitated 2 is surprisingly overjoyed to see Six and unsurprised by his rise to power, showing a lot of personal growth in his time off from being alive.
I wish to thank you for a recognition of my talent, which placed me in a position of power, second only to one.
Number 6, keeping his eye on the ball, asks number 2 if he ever met number 1, to which 2 laughs hysterically but then challenges number 1 directly.
Look me in the eye. Whoever you are. You'll hypnotize me no longer.
The president then identifies 48 and 2 as 2 different forms of revolt.
The first, uncoordinated youth, rebelling against nothing it can define. The second, an established, successful, secure member of the establishment, turning upon and biting the hand that feeds him.
6 represents the third form of revolt, the revolt of the individual, firm in his beliefs, pushing back against the constraints of society. This is the only way that earns their respect.
He has revolted, resisted, fought, held fast, maintained the right to be person, someone, or individual. We applaud his private war and concede that despite materialistic efforts, he has survived intact and secure.
They reward him with the key to his house, $1 million in traveler's checks, a passport, and petty cash, and give him his freedom. But he pushes back in that classic presidential rhetoric.
Why? You have convinced us of our mistakes.
Why?
You're pure, you know the way, show us. Why?
They plead for 6 to lead them, but also give him the choice to leave. All they ask is for him to address them so they can learn from his message. But then, as he starts to speak to the group, they don't listen as well as they promised to. When Patty first met Orson Welles at the audition for his Moby Dick, Orson kept talking to someone next to him throughout the entire audition until Patty eventually stormed out. Knowing what a proud man he was, you can feel how particularly insulting that treatment is.
In this connection, we have a prize.
Thank you! That's all I wanted. No one's been giving me prizes for noticing that things are like other things. He keeps trying to get the speech out until he is fully shouted down, and then he stops talking. And for the last 20 minutes of the series, he doesn't utter a single word. And so they lead him to meet number 1. The entire series has been building to this moment right here. He walks past 48 and 2, caged in their ineffective revolt, and ascends the steps into number 1's office. And then this happens.
I will not be pushed, filed, stamped, indexed, briefed, debriefed, or numbered. My life is my own. I
When it got very close to the last episode, and I hadn't written it yet, and I had to sit down this terrible day and write the last episode. May I have one, please? Mm-hmm. And I knew that it wasn't going to be something out of James Bond. And in the back of my mind, there was some parallel with the character 6 and the number 1 and the rest. And then I didn't really know exactly till I was about a third through the script, the last script.
In hindsight, it's the only thing that ever made sense as to why he had an ape mask on initially.
Because we're all supposed to come from these things, you know, and it's the same as the penny farthing symbol bicycle thing. Progress. And then the other bestial face behind it, which is laughing and jeering and jabbering like a monkey.
Number 1 is the dark side of ourselves, which may be the only thing truly keeping us from freedom. It's one of those classic reveals that even when I was a little kid who wasn't reading the themes, hit in an earth-shattering way. One of those deep connections with the work that you don't need to know the words to understand. As for why he only showed this monumental answer for a total of 30 frames,
I thought that I wasn't going to pander to a mentality so low that it couldn't perceive what I was trying to say.
With a quick look to the butler, they go to bust out the other 2 human forms of rebellion and start the biggest action sequence the show ever does. 6 sets a missile to launch, and in the ensuing chaos, blasts through the village staff with his fellow revolutionaries.
He just wants to get out, and he uses a technique which he hasn't used before that, which is violence, which is sad, but he does. And that's how he gets out.
This is all while All You Need Is Love once again blares over the speakers, and it's worth remembering that at this time it was a modern pop song. This influenced a nice song playing when something bad is happening, which after the Fallout series we can all take a break from doing for the next 20 years. They take over the apartment cage truck and book it out of the village while the innocent villagers escape via helicopter, and the blast from the rocket takeoff eviscerates Rover before destroying the village. Less literally, Rover's use as a tool of repression immediately disintegrates when the powers it serves are disbanded. These 3, the 3 types of revolt, have banded together and won, and they cut a rug to dry bones as the truck brings them home. And then, one by one, they get dropped off to meet their new future. 48 gets dropped off first, youthfully and meaningfully hitchhiking one direction and then the other. It doesn't matter to him which way he goes. Number 2 heads into the Palace of Westminster, meaningfully through the Peers entrance for members of the House of Lords, not visitors. 6 and his best friend the butler run through the street together to catch a bus home, where 6, who I'm still disrespectfully calling 6 in absence of knowing his real name, hops in his iconic car for a joyride, while the butler heads in to prepare his home for his return. And it's the same goddamn automatic doors from the village. And as we get our actor credits for each of this episode's main stars, Patty's name is absent, instead simply saying prisoner. The episode ends with him racing down the street the same way he has at the start of every episode. It's cyclical. There's no escape to be had here.
When that door opens on its own, and there's no one behind it, you know that somebody's waiting in there to start it all over again. He's got no freedom. Freedom is a myth.
That last bit of violence in the control room retroactively fits right in with the show's attitude towards it. It did nothing. The situation is the same as it ever was.
I think I said at some stage to Patrick, isn't this a strange end for a pacifist, anti-paranoia program? And he said, well, maybe it makes some terrible sort of logic.
Of course, it never made sense that the truck seemingly got them to London instantly. Even if the village wasn't exactly southwest of Portugal and Spain, the calculated location for Many Happy Returns, it's hard to imagine it being anywhere near a short drive away from Piccadilly Circus. In the script, the ending was 6 entering his home with the butler and closing the door as Dry Bones swells, and we hear, "Oh, hear the word of the Lord." Instead, it's only in the episode 4 times. So why is that song so significant, and why did Patty insist on its inclusion? Dry Bones is a person of color spiritual, based on the prophet Ezekiel, who was told the prophecy to a valley of dry bones to give them life. They then come to life and form an exceedingly large army.
The crucifixion of the 2 rebels when their arms are drawn apart, the temptation of number 6 by the president of the village, the temptation of Christ.
Yeah, to assume the throne. Yeah.
Right, dry bones, right out of Ezekiel.
Yeah.
First of all, would you agree with my idea that that is intentional, that it is...
Answering, no, I had never any religious inspiration for that whatsoever. I just thought it was a very good song for the situation, you know, and also it was applicable to the young man. because, as you know, it's easy for us to go astray in youth, and he was astray, and he's trying to get everything together again.
The 1988 graphic novel, The Prisoner, Shattered Visage, decided this episode was a drug trip that didn't happen, which is pretty cowardly to shirk the show's themes because you liked the look of the village too much and didn't want to rebuild it. Besides, the story is still ongoing. You could have picked it up from there if you wanted. This was just one run of an endless cycle. The object of the television series The Prisoner was to create a feeling of unrest about life today. It was an abstract expression of the world we're living in and a warning of what would happen to us when gadgetry and gimmickry take over from creative people. Okay, but really? Seriously? Why did he resign? Here's the answer according to Petit himself in a 1985 interview for New Video magazine. What? 15 years after The Prisoner ended. He simply resigns as a matter of choice. He shouldn't have to answer to anyone. It's entirely his prerogative, his God-given right as an individual to proceed in any way he sees fit. That's the whole point of it all. There are countless moments where Six could have pleaded with his captors, insisted that he really resigned to go on vacation, but he's above that. He doesn't want to dignify their question by earnestly engaging with it.
Why do you care? You'll never know.
Maybe that's why, despite our being asked not to accept his assigned number of 6, we never learn any other name to call him, because it's none of our goddamn business. Even in the scripts, he's always referred to as simply the letter P, for prisoner or for Petit. But we can't help but speculate, especially because of the tantalizing glimpses we get of the truth.
For peace of mind!
Here's something. Six might not even be a spy. In certain interviews, McGoohan still insists Six could be a scientist or a government official, and there's exactly one time he completely confirmed it. Let's go back to that first major publicity event. It was a press screening of the first 2 episodes back to back, and after the viewing, journalists were led into a giant room adorned with village props and decorations, where Petit was waiting inside a cage which looks from photos very similar to the one from the last 2 episodes. He was extremely hostile to questions, but here's one thing he did say. The Prisoner is all about freedom. It's about a top scientist who has vital space secrets in his head and decides he wants to resign. He has no name, he's kept prisoner in an isolated village where he's subjected to various brainwashing techniques. The scientist role fits in that he's A, smart and nonviolent as aligns with Patty's principles, but B, painted as a spy to appease executives and viewers because that kind of thing has always been hot. And he immediately stopped hitting the scientist thing so hard in interviews. So was letting us make assumptions about Six's profession a part of the show he just allowed to help it be successful? Or was it to challenge our own assumptions about the type of person worthy of having their conflict explored on a TV show? My lack of an answer may surprise you.
If you could leave one sentence or phrase or paragraph in the head of everyone who watched the Prisoner series, the whole series, one thing for them to carry around for a while when it was over, what would it be?
He's seeing you.
Just that. Enigmatic to the end.
He's seeing you. It means quite a lot.
It does indeed.
He's seeing you. Yeah.
After that unbelievable series finale aired, Petit actually took his family and went into hiding. He moved his family to Switzerland and lived there for 2 years, widely reported at the time and later repeated by himself that he had to run away because of the angry response to the finale from an enraged public. People like a good solid story that ends up the way it should, and this one didn't, of course, so there was an outcry. I nearly got lynched. Okay. I had to go into hiding and they thought they had been cheated. I don't think they'd been cheated, it's just that they still had this idea, God love them, that it was John Drake and it was a secret agent story and it was a Danger Man story or a James Bond story. Eventually he returned from Switzerland and went back to his old life. He still lived in the same house, spent time at the same pub, saw the same friends. I only want to be a true individual, to organize my working life so I do what I believe in. I try never to allow myself to become engulfed by outside pressures, though I might sometimes be by my own. We must resist to the last and die laughing. I mean, taking the words right out of my mouth. If I had read this at the time he said it, it would have gone straight in the MySpace profile. He'd go on to star in the show Rafferty, where he'd honor his wife by using photos of her as the photos of his late wife on the wall of his office. He ended up hating the executive overreach on Rafferty and felt like he was part of the system that churned out mediocre TV, describing it as probably the most horrendous experience of my life. Can you imagine going back to a mid-show like that after The Prisoner? It'd be like me going from having my own YouTube channel to doing Watch Mojo's top 10 movies formerly available on Amazon Amazon Prime Video. In 1981, he starred in Scanners, playing Scanners Commander Dr. Paul Ruth, and soon after was arrested for drunk driving for the first time since 1964. He was also charged with driving with a suspended license and driving without a license, which, wow, really threw the book at him. Later in the 1980s, he'd claimed to have given up the drink for good and to have entered a second honeymoon with his wife. His family has spoken about how he wrote love poems for his wife every day, and a lot of prose that was only for friends and family and has still never been published, in addition to tons more movie ideas that never came to fruition. He had a somewhat confusing choice of projects post-Prisoner. In general, I expected him to be more prolific for the incredible talent he proved himself to have, but he only starred in one project every few years, and it was usually something like Baby, Secret of the Lost Legend, which was about a paleontologist finding a baby dinosaur alive, a concept Patty regarded as delightful. He was also apparently offered the role of Dumbledore and was Peter Jackson's first choice for the role of Gandalf, according to online lists whose sources are other lists, to which Patty presumably responded, "No! I'm busy doing Baby." One of his most notable late-in-life contributions was to Columbo, where he holds the record for most times playing a killer with 4, and also directed Identity Crisis, one of Peter Falk's favorite episodes, even sneaking in some Prisoner Easter eggs.
What's more, they're seeing you.
Bye.
In the 90s, the Prisoner was very much still with him. I can remember every shot. I can remember every lens. It's embedded profoundly in the subconscious, never to go away. It seems he was still waffling back and forth on his relationship with the Prisoner's fans. In some interviews, he's grateful to the fans, and others he feels unable to escape from the series, imprisoned by the overactive fans keeping him tied to it. Everyone is a prisoner of something. You escape when you're released, I suppose, by death. In 2009, he escaped his earthly confinement at the age of 80, and we would never get another word from him explaining The Prisoner. If whatever we wanted to say is not already contained within the episodes of the series, then I failed in the production of them, and any amount of chit-chat now will not make good that omission. I think the meaning of the show isn't hard to grasp. Honestly, part of the surreality the show creates is that the conflict is so straightforward. It's our world with less artifice, with the goals and needs of the human soul being fought for as the solitary war of our day-to-day existence, rather than being buried beneath so much politics and news and television. The village represents the daily trials we're put against to justify our lives. Any attempt to live a life of our own must first be scrutinized and approved by the elites and the controllers of our culture. Two and the village are a nationless, amalgamous mass of humanity that is driven by fear and distrust, and quick to villainize others for being what it is afraid of being. Different. It's like the Emoji Movie. I also don't want to recap every theme and message throughout the show because honestly I want you to watch it and form your own opinions. But I also have to be realistic that if you haven't seen it, I have responsibility as the person serving you probably the most information you will ever get about the show. I am defining your understanding of it and handing you a take from a perceived expert. No show recap is comprehensive, they're just fun to watch, like reading Wikipedia plot synopsises without even having to do the reading part, while getting served highlight clips curated by a host you like or hate watch. This is all just one path through a huge amount of material and an incredibly impactful life, and the most interesting path for me is the one that led to that mental breakdown of a series finale. That wasn't out of nowhere. The stress peaked, the rage fully boiled. The whole show, The Prisoner, is an expression of rage that Patty had no choice but to make. He was pushing back against expectations of him from the public and the media, and not just the text of the show, but by the fact of its existence. By the bravery of making something so ahead of its time, so disinterested in pandering to the viewer the way television has always been expected to. And him making this angry show in his angry, hurried way worked. The show is beyond iconic, a landmark in the pantheon of television history, made by one visionary refusing to delegate nearly anything, and through an irresponsible shotgun spread application of his creative skills, made a show that matched that chaotic energy. But was it really even all him? For all the credit I've given him as the sole voice, this show's staying power is 90% its visuals, and there was that art director, Jack Shampin. We should probably give that guy some credit, right? And there's George Markstein, the original script editor, who claimed Patty stole all his ideas. Is that true? I couldn't find much backing it up, but who knows? So is Patty really the auteur we believe him to be? Certainly people who worked on the show speak highly of the breadth of his input, but credit to the smaller voices will always disappear in the shadow of this huge personality and the much more exciting story of one man's profound vision and firm grasp of his work. We all want to be the genius artist who made unparalleled works of art all alone, with no help. We see someone taking years off their life in servitude of their ultimate project, inconsolable in their pursuit of getting it just perfect, In our grief, we want to see someone else's and be inspired that our grief can be beautiful. It's romantic. It's pain with purpose, pain that has earned something lasting. I think we see single auteurs with incomparable works of genius on one end of the spectrum, and all the way on the other end are soulless works by committee. So many creative and uncreative voices weighing in as to remove any personality or specificity from the piece. How can 1,000 people say something personal? But buying into the myth of auteurship has its downsides. Petit isolated himself in his work. I don't claim that having complete ownership of The Prisoner is the sole reason he struggled with alcoholism, screamed at those people, turned him into that nightmare, but it was a situation and process that clearly poisoned working relationships and his own well-being. How could it not? Sleeping 3 hours a night between living and breathing this one extremely personal project? He was like Bo Burnham inside. Shit, that would have been a way better headline, huh? Why Bo Burnham is like this old ass fucking show? Get Bo in the thumbnail? You would have clicked that way sooner. It's like with all these YouTubers quitting, citing they just can't work 7-day weeks anymore. You are working 7-day weeks? You're your own boss. And your boss is being toxic. We can work on our projects in a way that doesn't make us hate them. We can spread out the labor over a comfortable amount of time, put it together with friends we trust that can stop us from losing our minds, and thoughtfully make the act of creating it fun. We can recognize that when we've found success, our job is now to make what we're doing sustainable. If we grind in the way we had to get here forever, we'll destroy it. The Prisoner is a phenomenal piece of work that I will love forever. And it came at the cost of Petit striking fear in others, years of repair with his family, and his own happiness. I have built this narrative through this work because I fear it happening to me. On some level, I'm building a cautionary tale to remind myself of what's important to me and what I never want to do. I have burnt myself out dozens of times. I've gotten lost in projects and felt so isolated and alone. But to let anyone else in and give them real influence on something personal in progress is so vulnerable. It requires you to open your ideas up to scrutiny and so open yourself up to being wrong. It also requires you to share the glory. I don't think I'm alone in saying sometimes I want to be the person who made the thing more than I want to actually make the thing. To sidestep the pursuit of being the auteur genius takes trust and humility in an inherently ego-stroking profession. The themes of The Prisoner reverberate through McGowan's personal life, and vice versa. They inform each other, and it's the same for my work. So seeing this cycle repeat itself again and again and ruin the dream of so many artists, I have to ask myself the same question every one of us through every generation has asked. What will I put up with to be remembered?
You should do that line more like, to be remembered, what is up with which I will put?
No,